Hello, hello. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I apologize for being a little bit late, but we'll wait a couple minutes for everybody to get here and then we can start. Also, can you hear me okay? Just want to make sure. You can just comment. Take that as a cool. Cool. All right. So I guess while people are coming in, I can do brief introductions. My name is John Ford. I'm here on behalf of CyberHawks, the Cybersecurity Club, and I know Aisha is also coming in, and she'll be presenting on behalf of WiCyS, Women in Cybersecurity. And today we're going to be talking about cookies a little bit. So if you've ever heard of course, not the kind of cookies that you bake, but the kind of cookies that you would find when you're browsing online. And we'll be talking about, first we'll be talking about what exactly they are and what they do, and then I'll be going over some of the vulnerabilities that are associated with them and how you can try to prevent those vulnerabilities from occurring. So, and if you have questions at any point throughout this thing, feel free to comment. Hopefully we'll try to get to your question as it rolls in, but if we don't get to your question, I apologize. Yeah. Hello. I guess while we're waiting, if anybody has general cybersecurity questions, feel free to ask. I mean, I'd be glad to answer them. I know we'll start talking about cookies in a second for those of you who just joined. Cookies and how they affect your privacy and browsing when you're online. My background is literally, I am sitting in the lounge of SSV, so you're seeing the sky and part of a pole that's there. Yeah. Oh, unless you mean cybersecurity background, maybe you mean that. That's probably what you mean. I've been doing, yeah, sorry. I've been doing programming since I was like sixth grade in high school. Sixth grade in middle school. But I started cybersecurity around when I first started high school. Actually, my mother sent me an interesting website on how to gain access to Wi-Fi in coffee shops using, anyway, So that's kind of how I got into cybersecurity. And then from there, that gave me the terminology that I needed to look up cybersecurity things. And so I started just researching on my own online. And since then, I've participated in a few different courses. Like I took a Udemy course in cybersecurity. I took the OSCP certification. That's Offensive Security Certified Professional. I did not pass because it's a really difficult certification to pass. Looks like Aisha's here. But anyway, I've kind of been working on my own now that I got involved in CyberHawks, the cybersecurity club. I'm continuing from there. And hello.
Hey, John. I'm so
Aisha,
sorry
glad you
about
could
the
join
delay.
No, you're fine. I was late too, so
Yeah.
it's all good.
Okay. All right. So I think we should just dive right into it. So my name's Aisha, and I'm currently a WiCyS recruit. So I'm going to be on their executive board next semester. And so today, me and John are basically going to be talking about cookies and privacy. And I think it's a topic that's really interesting and relevant to all of us. So I'll just dive straight into it. And so basically, a lot of us love browsing the internet and perusing our favorite websites. And so one of the first things that we notice with when we're on these websites are notifications that pop up on the bottom about cookies. And so oftentimes these notifications will tell us like, hey, do you want to, if you're browsing our website, we're using cookies. And so you're basically agreeing to the terms and conditions of our cookie policies. Or they might give you the option to accept or decline the cookies. And based on whether you accept or decline them, the website will basically tailor your browsing experience to what you chose. So it's really relevant to us, especially because cookies are heavily correlated with our privacy and our security. So it's something that we need to be aware of, and whether we should, I guess, accept these cookies and whether we shouldn't, and in which circumstances that would be appropriate, and just the long-term implications of what those cookies mean for us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what cookies are and what they do. So in plain text, cookies are small pieces of data. They're text files that are held and stored by the web browser. And so their main purpose is basically to identify your presence on the website and to track your activities. So whether those activities are something like what you click on the website or what you're browsing through, and in general, just the things that you're interested in, those cookies will track that. If you search something up on the search bar for the particular website, like maybe you were searching a specific item or keyword, it's going to track that, and it's going to basically have that in its history. So in general, cookies are basically used to track you, to track what you're doing on the computer, on the website. So before I dive further into how cookies exactly improve your browsing experience, I'd like to first talk about the distinctions between different kinds of cookies. So historically, there's been magic cookies, which is kind of more of an old-fashioned term to basically describe pieces of data that were exchanged between servers, the server and your computer. And so basically those data pieces would help establish your presence on the computer. So if you logged in, for instance, those cookies would track you, and they would know that you logged in. So it wasn't so much as for browsing, it was just more for logging in and just establishing your presence on the computer. And the cookies that we're used to and we know about today are, they're basically called HTTP cookies. And so many of you may know that HTTP is a server that lots of websites use today. And so those cookies are the ones that basically have to do with tailoring your browsing experience to what you're doing and tracking your activities on that website itself. So I think that distinction is really important because we're mostly going to be talking about HTTP cookies in this Fireside chat. So going on to just how HTTP cookies improve our browsing experience, they can do a number of things. One of the most prominent uses of cookies on websites is for user recognition. So if you, for instance, signed up on an account for a website and you put in your details, you put in your name, your last name, your email, all the information that the website requires of you. Basically, you'll be logged in every time you return back to that website. So there won't be that hassle of the website forgetting you, or you have to like log in every time you're in there. And it'll basically remember you and remember your details. And another important thing that cookies can be related to is like user preferences. So let's say that you're on a website like the New York Times, and a website like the New York Times has a lot of different topics, a lot of different interests that you can read about. There's news about art, there's art news, there's politics, there's sports, just a variety of different things. And if you are prone to going on that website and pressing on news articles pertaining to sports, and you're really interested in that in particular, every time you return on the homepage, there will be lots of content that the New York Times is going to give you about basically sports news. So it'll personalize your experience to that based on what your activity has been on the New York Times website, versus giving you news related to politics maybe, or if it does, it'll be in lesser amounts. And then going on, one other big thing with cookies are they can personalize your ad experiences. So if you are on another website and you're, for instance, looking at something like Mother's Day gifts, and you're typing that up in the search engine, the next time you return, you might see a bunch of ads that are maybe promoting items for Mother's Days, like flowers, or other gifts or other things like that. And that's very common as well. And so those ads are meant to target your sense of taste and your interests and what you like. And they're also used as a good marketing way to market their products as well of that website. And the last main use of cookies that I want to bring up is with a lot of like shopping sites. A lot of retail websites use cookies to basically track the things that are in your shopping carts. So if you've added items, it'll track those to your cart, and it'll basically bring up possible suggestions to you based on what's in your cart. So based on what you may have purchased, in addition to things that you have in your cart, it could also look at things that you've purchased in the past, things that you've browsed through or you've repeatedly clicked in the last few days or whenever you do it. And like I said before, that's a benefit to you because it's really looking at your preferences, but it's also, I guess, beneficial to the company as well, because they're really just trying to market their products, and they're trying to get you to buy as much as possible from them. And one other thing I want to mention about shopping sites that use cookies is if you were, for instance, to put something in your cart, and let's say you didn't buy it that day, when you return back a few days later, you haven't enabled cookies on your website, those items in your cart will basically be gone, and you'll have to start all over again, which you can see can be a really big inconvenience. So that's one of the biggest benefits of cookies, of just recognizing the user, remembering who you are and what you've done on the website. And so the last thing I want to talk about in terms of HTTP cookies are different kinds of HTTP cookies. So there's first-party HTTP cookies and there's third-party cookies. And so this is kind of where the topic of privacy overlaps with that distinction between first and third-party cookies. So with first-party cookies are the ones that are directly provided by the website that you're using, and they're used solely for the purpose of that website. So with the shopping cart example for the shopping sites that use cookies, those cookies are solely being used for the purpose of tracking your cart, giving you suggestions, and just making your browsing experience better. And they're being directly provided by the cookies, or by the website itself. So it's first party. And then with third party cookies, that's another. Third party is like, it's not the actual website, it's third party companies. So an advertising company, for instance, might be supplying those cookies. So if you go on a website and you see a bunch of ads on the sides, and if you don't even click on the ads, it's possible that your browser actually downloads those cookies that are provided by the third party company, advertising company. So let's say you exit out of that website and you search things in your browser. For instance, if you go on Google and you search in like, oh, sportswear or athletic clothes, and then you come back to that website a few days later and you start seeing ads for sportswear and athletic clothes. So those third-party cookies have actually, in a sense, they've basically tracked you. They've tracked what you've done outside of that actual website. And now they're providing things on another website that's basically tracking what you've looked at and trying to appeal to your sense of interest and your personalized sense of interest. So that's kind of where the privacy comes in, because a lot of people may perceive that as an invasion of privacy because that's something that they're doing outside of the website and it doesn't really have to do with the actual website itself. So yeah, that's what I have to say about cookies and just a summary of what they are and their implications and what they kind of do in the long term. And I believe John's going to talk a little bit more about how they are correlated to privacy and your security and whether you should accept them or not.
So just to do a quick recap of what was said, or kind of the important points. Cookies are text files that are stored on your computer that contain information about your browsing. There are kind of two primary uses that I will be talking about for cookies. One is for establishing sessions, and then the other is for collecting information about the things you're looking up or you're browsing so that advertisers can tailor to your interests. The first thing, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about information collection, or advertisers, usually third-party sites, collecting information about the sorts of websites you visit so they can tailor ads to your interests. Some people like this because it does provide you with ads that you would be interested in and with things you're more likely to buy. However, some people feel that it's a breach of privacy. I mean, they are in fact looking at the websites that you visit. If you do feel that it's a breach of privacy, something you can do is you can send a do not track request. This is within your browser, you choose to send do not track requests. What that means is it will ask that any site that is storing cookies on your computer, it asks that it doesn't do it if it doesn't have to. The issue with this, of course, is that with a do not track request, the actual site that's giving you the cookies can follow it, but doesn't necessarily have to, right? So a lot of ad sites, if the ad site is nice, they will not store cookies on your computer. And of course, the ads you see will not necessarily be tailored towards you. But if they're not as nice, they will do it regardless, even though you sent them a do not track request. So some ways to prevent this are you could use an ad blocker, or such as AdBlock Plus, or an extension like Privacy Badger. And what these do is they will check for sites that are not listening to the do not track request and storing cookies anyway, and they'll specifically look for advertising sites, and they won't let those sites store cookies on your computer. So that's one way of preventing that. Another good thing to do is occasionally clear your cookies, which you can do by going into the settings of your web browser. And what that'll do is that all the information that they've stored about you will be cleared, so that you're kind of starting from scratch. But the next thing that I want to talk about, we kind of just talked about privacy there. Now I want to talk about the actual security of cookies. And that comes into play when we talk about sessions. The way it works is when you log into a website for the first time, like let's say you're logging into your email, you're going to have to enter your username and password, right? Now what that remote site's going to do is it'll send you back a session ID. So it's a unique identifier that will end up being stored on your computer as well as on the server that you're connecting to. And then the next time that you try to log in, you won't have to enter your username and password. Instead, your computer will send the session ID, and from there, the server will know that the session ID is correct, so it'll automatically log you in. This can be a problem if attackers are somehow able to get the session ID from you and then basically impersonate you to log into sites. And there are a couple ways they can go about doing this. The first is, let's say there's a secure flag that goes with each cookie. And if that secure flag is set, that means that the cookies are going to be encrypted when they're sent back and forth between the user and the server. So ideally, any login cookie should be encrypted. However, if a server is improperly configured and that secure flag is not set, then anybody who's monitoring the network can see the sorts of things that you send back and forth between yourself and the server, and then they can capture your cookie and they can log in as you. So that's one way that attackers can exploit that. The other way is cross-site scripting. So there are kind of two ways to cross-site script. And what cross-site scripting means is injecting code somehow into the pages that a user visits to do something malicious. So one way of doing that is stored cross-site scripting. So let's say there's a forum on the target site, and you enter, let's say it doesn't check necessarily for what you enter. So if you enter HTML code in there, you can write your own script that whenever somebody browses to the site, they'll see that script, that it'll run that script on their computer. So that's a stored cross-site scripting attack. And the reason it's stored is because it would actually be stored on the server. Like if you make a post in a forum, it's going to be stored on the server. The other type is reflected. So what that means is, let's say you get a malicious link that in the URL, it has some sort of script. That's not necessarily stored on the server, but if you connect using that malicious URL, what it'll do is that URL will have that info in it. And so when it connects to the computer, it'll end up executing those scripts. And so that's one way that cross-site scripting is one way that an attacker might be able to get your session ID. If they can get you to log in, either if they can get you to log in using a specific session ID, because what you can do is in that URL, let's say, you can force a specific session ID. So if an attacker gives you a malicious URL that forces you to use a specific session ID, and then you end up logging in using that session ID, then what happens is anybody who uses that session ID can also log in. So an attacker would also be able to log in. Hopefully that kind of made sense. I know that's kind of confusing for those of you who aren't technically involved in this. The other way that an attacker might be able to impersonate you is through cross-site request forgery. What this is I think it's best illustrated with an example. So let's say normally you would browse to a website, and of course it would recognize your session ID, and so it would log you in, and you can make changes from there. What an attacker can do is they can create a separate malicious site or some malicious script that it would do something that you as a user would be able to do. Let's say it deletes something from that site that you as a user could do, but the attacker doesn't have the credentials to do that. However, they can store that script on a separate website and make it so that if you browse to that malicious website, it will, as you, through that malicious website, connect to the original site and make those changes. So it'll essentially forward your session ID through a malicious site to the actual website and make those changes. So that's a cross-site request forgery. Preventions for these, session hijacking, or in other words, an attacker using a cookie to impersonate you, there's not really much you can do as a user. Most of the vulnerabilities from there arise from poor configurations on behalf of the person hosting the server, right? So what developers can do is they can perform additional checks of the source address of who authenticated. What I mean by that is, let's say you sign in to Gmail from a different account, or from a different, sorry, I should say from a different computer or a different device. You'll receive an email and it'll tell you, be careful, somebody, sorry, I'm reading the comments and it's kind of distracting me. It'll say, be careful because somebody from a different device, from a different computer logged in as you. And that could indicate that they stole your session ID and then they're trying to impersonate you. It doesn't necessarily indicate that, because if you logged in from a different device, then it is actually you. But that's the reason that you receive those emails that say somebody logged in from a different device as you. So that's a nice thing to have. The other thing that developers can do is shorten the cookie expiry time, or shorten the session ID expiry time. And what the expiry time is the session ID will last for a certain amount of time before you have to log in again and establish a new session ID. Of course, it's a little, if you shorten the expiry time, that's more annoying for users, because that means users have to log in more often because their session is no longer valid. But however, it does help with the security, because if the session ID only lasts for a limited amount of time, it's less likely that a hacker who gets an older session ID is going to be able to log in as you. What can you do as a user? I mean, you can manually do that yourself. And what I mean by that is, if you log out and then delete all the cookies on your browser and then log back in again, you're logging back in, but you're going to have a different session ID. So that's essentially doing that, but as a user. However, that's kind of, most users aren't that, I guess don't have the initiative to necessarily do that often. But the more important thing that you can do as a user is make sure that you don't click any malicious links that come from a source that you don't know the source, or visit malicious websites. Because this cross-site scripting, it happens via a malicious link. The link has code embedded into it. And a lot of the times it's hard to see because the character formatting makes it hard to see. Like, you can use % characters to make the link look weird. Also, if you have a bit.ly link or a tiny URL link, that's dangerous because you can shorten any URL you want. So they could shorten a URL that has that cross-site scripting in it and give you a malicious link. But that's shortened so you don't see it necessarily. So be careful when it comes to the links you click on, because somebody could be stealing your session ID. Also, try not to visit malicious websites, because once again, a cross-site request forgery comes from when you visit a malicious website and they try to impersonate you and connect to another site. So yeah, hopefully there's some information about, yeah, I know it is pretty crazy. So there's some information about the security vulnerabilities associated with cookies, and hopefully that gave you a better idea of what sorts of things you can do. To answer the question that was, I know it was already answered in the comments, but no credit card information is not stored in cookies. Usually that's stored, or it's not stored as a cookie, but it is also similarly stored on your computer in a secured file. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Otherwise, that's kind of it for this presentation. If you want like any more thorough or technical an explanation on cross-site scripting or cross-site request forgery or any of these things, or if it didn't make sense to you, let me know. For those of you who just came in, I mean, you kind of missed the presentation, but that's a good question. I'd say it depends on the company. The question is, do you think companies are very transparent with what they do with cookies? Generally, yes. I want to say yes. Especially, it's nice when, I think Aisha talked about how some sites will say at the bottom that this site collects cookies, and then they'll have an okay, I'm okay with this, and a learn more button. And when you go there, then they'll list everything that they do with their cookies. I'm not entirely sure that it's legally required that they be completely transparent with what they do. So I don't know that every site is completely transparent with this, but yeah. Yeah, if there are any more questions. That's a good question. What should I do if a page doesn't load if I don't accept their cookies? Well, cookies aren't inherently a bad thing. And a lot of people see that and they're like, oh no, they're collecting information about me. But so long as the company isn't doing anything malicious with that information, which most of the time is just used for advertising. I mean, what can you use cookies for, really? You can either use it for advertising or you can use it for session hacking. Session hacking is also a different thing. Like that would be a malicious attacker doing that. And on legitimate sites, that's not going to happen. But I wouldn't be afraid to accept cookies, is what I'm saying. Like there's nothing inherently bad about cookies. If a page doesn't load, if you don't accept their cookies, well, there's not much you can do about that because it's kind of up to the developer, right? It's up to whoever's hosting the website to decide if they should give you access to the page. And if they choose not to give you that, then there's not really much you can do about that. I really haven't seen that happen though. I don't think, I'm sure it probably is the case on some pages, but I don't think I've ever come across a scenario in which not accepting cookies didn't let me visit a website. Sometimes what they'll do actually is they won't let you visit a page if you don't accept ads. That's a little different because a lot of sites generate their revenue off of those advertisements. So I guess they don't give you access to their website if you're not helping them keep the website going. But yeah, that's also different from necessarily collecting cookies, because cookies is specifically collecting the information about where you're browsing so that ads can be targeted to you, whereas that's more actually providing you with ads. So. That's a good question. So some websites give you an option to accept or reject the use of your cookies. Do you think they don't save the cookies if you clicked reject? Is there a way to know? I think from a legal standpoint, and I'm not well versed in this enough to give you a full answer, but I'm pretty sure that from a legal standpoint, if you click reject, they're required, if they gave you the option, to not use your cookies. Like if for the same reason that when you're filling out a form, if you check the accept terms of use box, you're legally bound to accept the terms of use. And for the same reason, if a website, or kind of in a similar fashion, if a website tells you that this is what they're going to be doing with your cookies, they're kind of, as a user, they're legally held responsible for doing what they say they're going to do with those cookies. So, but someone might want to check that because I'm not entirely sure. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not. I could be wrong. Yeah, if there are any more questions, I'd be glad to answer them. Sure, no problem. Well, since there don't seem to be any more questions, I guess we'll call it a day. Feel free, if you ever do end up having questions, you can reach out to either CyberHawks or WiCyS via email, or you can reach out to me via email. Glad you found it informative. If you want to reach out to me via email, it's jford11@hawk.it.edu, and I'd be glad to answer any more questions. If you're interested in learning how to perform any of these attacks, like cross-site scripting or cross-site request forgery, I've done them, so I'd be glad to teach you how to do that too. That's why we have the cybersecurity clubs here, to teach you how attackers go about doing these attacks and how to prevent them. So yeah, have a good day, and I'll see you later. Also, this recording will be available. Yeah, I will put my personal email in the chat, although you can also reach out to CyberHawks or WiCyS, and through their email, and I'm sure they'll be glad to help you. And I believe, let me just check. Here's the WiCyS email. I'll post all of them, and you can choose who you want to reach out to. And then here's the CyberHawks email. Yeah. Alrighty. And this, what I was saying is this, oh, yeah, sorry, you got kicked out. I guess fine, we kind of ended, but this recording will be available on the URJ Instagram after this is over. So if you ever want to view this again, like you forgot something, you can always view it again. I guess that's it. I guess we'll call it a day, and see you guys.